Gost Pange je Jakub Janda, izvršni direktor češke nevladine organizacije European Values Think Tank. Mr. Janda, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for welcoming me. Happy to be here.
Well, I would like to start with a comparison between the two presidential candidates. What are their main talking points? Where do you see the most friction? Would you say this is a clear-cut race between these two candidates? We have one with a clear vision of the Czech Republic in the EU and NATO, and the other is, say, more populist.
You can say that, and I think that's accurate. We have two major candidates in the second round of the presidential elections. The one who is leading all of the polls is a former chief of Czech General Staff. His name is General Petr Pavel. He was also the chairman of the NATO Military Committee, so the highest military body within NATO. He's retired and he's running for the presidency on a platform of being strongly supportive of the Czech EU and NATO membership, being very strongly against, let's say, trying to defend against Russian aggression and the Chinese threat in the future, and being very openly criticizing Viktor Orban and his activities in the Central European region. His challenger is the former Prime Minister Andrej Babiš, who is running on a platform of pretty populist one. In many ways, his rhetoric goes to the far right. He's actually trying to portray General Pavel as the warmonger, basically, as the one who is, if you elect him, he will open or bring Czech Republic to the Russian war in Ukraine. So that's the main topic of the elections now. And the race is obviously very close. We are just a couple of days away from the elections. And we should know by Saturday afternoon, who the next president will be.
Well, as you said, General Pavel narrowly took the lead in the first round of election, but he does seem to be leading in the polls. I've seen some polls showing that he has more than 50%. Well, do you believe these polls are indicative of what we'll see this weekend, or do you believe there is enough room for, say, surprises? What are the predictions right now?
The expectation is that in next 3 days, approximately, that's basically till Thursday. That's the time when anything can happen, when there'll be a couple of presidential discussions or duels, when they'll be discussing each other, and also that there will be likely some of the dirty tactics being used. So some of the, let's say, smear campaigns against some of them, that's quite well expected, and usually that happens in our elections here. That the last day or two are the toughest ones, where you see a lot of confusion and a lot of attacks and accusations being brought through various parts of the Czech media environment. So that's what you could expect. So it's close at this moment, but really the decision is on likely Wednesday, Thursday. We'll see what happens. The election day starts on Friday afternoon and ends on Saturday afternoon.
Well, what I found interesting is that neither of the candidates, and nor any of the 8 candidates from the first round, to be precise, are from the ruling coalition. Pavel does have the support from Spolu, from the ruling coalition, but both Pavel and Babiš enjoy a great deal of support from voters, even though they are not part of this ruling coalition. What does this tell us about the state of Czech politics?
In many ways, actually, we live in a political system where the government, led by the prime minister, is in charge of policies. That's the main executive body of the state. While the president has a more ceremonial role, something like the German, or you could say Slovak or Hungarian president. But given that actually the Czech presidents are now being elected directly, they actually have larger mandates than the governments usually. More people vote for them in the direct elections in the second round than they do for governing coalitions. So in many ways, Czech presidents can actually use this popular mandate to have informal influence, despite the fact that their formal competencies are quite limited. So that's something what makes the president quite different. Every presidential candidate who wants to have a real support basically needs to get a broader coalition behind him, not only a partisan one, because actually political parties actually govern in the governing coalition, let's say, but they usually in many ways have many enemies, because our political system is proportionate, which means that we currently have coalition consisting of 5 parties, which means that each of them has strong backers, but only not like more than 20%, and many enemies, which means that if you want to be a majority candidate in the presidential elections, you need to be acceptable for quite a wide range of voters. So you cannot be a partisan candidate of one or two political parties, but you need to be acceptable to more of them.
During the campaign, we've seen, some accusations thrown both ways. It seems interesting that both candidates share a past link to the communist establishment in former Czechoslovakia. Babiš, which he denies was an agent in the secret police, and Pavel was involved in the military. They seem to use these facts to their advantage in the campaign to attack one another. Now, you've mentioned that that the presidential candidate needs to appeal to more voters, to a bigger base. How do these facts, do they have the power to sway them, perhaps?
Only for General Pavel's electorate, basically, because Andrej Babiš has been the Czech Prime Minister and Minister of Finance. He's been in the top of Czech politics for almost 10 years. And his voters got already accustomed to this fact that he is a former member of the Communist Party of Czechoslovakia and also the informant or confidant of the secret police of Czechoslovakia, a communist secret police. And his electorate seems to be quite okay with that, unfortunately. For General Pavel, he was in the military, and he was actually also a member of the Communist Party for a couple of years in late 80s. And because his electorate is pretty much, to some extent, center-right, liberal, those who actually usually are strongly anti-communist in the Czech political context, actually he had to explain and advocate and that he made mistakes of being a member of the Communist Party and being associated with the communist regime. But last 30 years of his service in the Czech democratic military has something basically taken away this sin. That's something what he's trying to say, and many of the voters actually buy this, let's say, apology. But it is true that this fact is demobilizing for some of the voters who would otherwise vote for Pavel, and now in the second round we see the effort to actually mobilize them despite this communist past of Pavel in here.
Well, you've mentioned that the office of the president is largely formal and ceremonial. Now, Babiš's ANO party won the majority of votes in the last parliamentary election, but it is not part of the ruling coalition. Are you saying that Babiš is trying to ramp up the opposition by becoming president?
Yes, if Andrej Babiš would become Czech president, he would be a de facto leader of the opposition, sitting as the Czech president, and quite likely he would try to have effectively a presidential political party, which is currently in the opposition, but he's trying to push the current governing coalition against him, or they are fighting each other as every political opposition would be doing it. So if he's elected the Czech president, he would actually have much more power in an informal sense. He cannot formally throw down the Czech government, but he could put a lot of pressure on the governing coalition, and we'll see if it crumbles, which might happen in upcoming years, for example.
Babiš has been likened to other populist leaders like Donald Trump or Silvio Berlusconi and Viktor Orban. Are these comparisons correct, would you say? And we can note some similarities, but are there any major differences between Babiš and these leaders?
Babiš would like to be seen as Viktor Orban of Czech Republic, but he's not smart enough and he's not competent enough to be one. We have seen Andrej Babiš openly praise Viktor Orban many times. He sees him as his own political idol, I would say. But actually, Andrej Babiš was already had his term as the Czech Prime Minister and before that as the Vice Prime Minister and Minister of Finance. And he was basically unable of doing things which Viktor Orban does, which is changing electoral laws, for example, or pretty much going hard against the independent media and independent civil society, which is good that he is so incompetent of doing that. But at the same time, Andrej Babiš wishes to be something like Viktor Orban of Czech Republic. And if Andrej Babiš is elected, he would be a good political ally for Viktor Orban, who is a Russian Trojan horse in Central Europe. So it would be a very bad thing for NATO if Andrej Babiš is elected.
Is it true that many Czechs see Babiš as unfit for office, given that he spent months on trial accused of assisting in EU subsidy fraud before entering politics? Now, did the recent verdict clearing Babiš of charges of fraud help him in the eyes of the public?
I don't honestly think so, because the main problem for Babiš is that his unacceptability. He is unacceptable to many of the voters, to large portion of the voters, and that's something what is hurting him now in the second round of the presidential elections, where he effectively needs to have or win the majority to win the presidency, because he's been, let's say, so populist and in many ways lying so much over so many years that he has a core voter base, that's for sure, mainly former social democratic voters and some of the far-right voters. That's what Babiš has, but he's unable of expanding his electoral base. That's his main problem, and that's mainly because of his already existing public profile for quite many years. So he is in a trap, and his only chance is to make sure that the challenger, General Petr Pavel, will not receive enough votes in his advantage. That's his only chance Babiš has.
Speaking of the campaign and all that comes with it, we've seen recently that the police in the Czech Republic have opened an investigation into an anonymous letter threatening Babiš's wife. Now, Pavel has repudiated the threats, but has accused his rival of, straining the atmosphere. What do you make of this? Is the atmosphere in the Czech Republic getting, heated because of the election? And are the candidates themselves to blame?
It is. In many ways, it is. If you look through the presidential campaign of Andrej Babiš, his billboards, his campaign is basically saying, if you vote for me, I will bring peace. If you vote for the other guy, he will bring war to Czech Republic, which is not true in every sense. So Babiš is publicly lying, and in many ways, actually, he's trying to scare mainly the older voters who obviously are scared, and because honestly the situation is scary with the Russian war in Ukraine. But actually, if you keep lying about how the next candidate will bring war to the Czech Republic, which there's no evidence for that, that's obviously scaremongering, you could say. And that's what Babiš is doing, because it seems to be his only chance to likely try to win the presidency. But what it will bring is quite a lot of polarization, which is already happening here, because people obviously are scared because of the war, but lying about it doesn't help. And that's unfortunately what Andrej Babiš does now.
Now, given that General Pavel is a former chairman of the NATO Military Committee, what is Babiš implying with this rhetoric?
Actually, in the first week of the second round, meaning last week from now, all the billboards of Andrej Babiš across the Czech Republic were saying, I will not bring war to Czech Republic. I'm a diplomat. I'm not a soldier. And he was basically referring to Petr Pavel, and he's saying that Petr Pavel, as a soldier, former soldier, retired soldier, would bring war to Czech Republic. It has actually upsetted so many of the current and former military leaders of Czech Republic, because they are saying, like, look, we spent our careers trying to save our country from war, and you are saying we are bringing it here. It's like saying, like, a doctor is trying to kill you instead of cure you. So that's something what is so polarizing. And I only can hope that that's something what will not get enough voters to vote for Babiš and not vote for Pavel, which is the only tactic Andrej Babiš has now.
Babiš runs with the support of the outgoing president, Miloš Zeman, who is known to have supported Vladimir Putin up until the invasion of Ukraine. Babiš also has ties with Belarusian President Lukashenko. He has been skeptical on the issue of sending military aid to Kiev, while Pavel, on the other hand, has a clear pro-Ukraine stance, along with Prime Minister Fiala, and firmly believes in sending material support to Kiev. Now, we've mentioned the war in Ukraine. What does the outcome of this election, of the presidential election, mean for Czech foreign policy? Will we see a radical change if Pavel wins?
If Pavel wins, you will see reinforcement of what the current Czech government is doing, which is very strong political, financial, and material and military assistance to Ukraine. That's something what Pavel would be doing, as he's saying it. He's already been doing it in the previous jobs he had. So that's clearly what we could see, which I think would be quite positive. If Andrej Babiš would be elected, I would assume that there would be a lot of domestic fights with the government. He would be trying to push against the governing coalition. he doesn't really care that much about foreign policy, honestly. He only uses it to slam his domestic political opponents. So I would expect mainly a lot of internal paralysis between the president and the government, something what we see in some countries like Croatia, for example, where there's a split between a president and the government, which would be unfortunate. But Czech Republic would not become a pro-Russian country because Andrej Babiš would be elected. It would look very bad. Unfortunately, we have had and we are pro-Russian or president or traitor working for as a Russian asset as a president, meaning Miloš Zeman for the last 10 years. That's true. But there is still the government which decides on policies. It will be under huge pressure by the president, but the government decides. That's the most important part.
Given that these elections are, here we have directly elected public officials, even though the role is, as we've established, largely formal. Now, what do the results of these elections, what will they tell us about public opinion in regards to the conflict in Ukraine?
Quite likely, there will be a split between people who actually want to support Ukraine and help Ukrainians who are defending their country from Russian aggression. That's more or less the voters for Pavel, with some exceptions, and those who actually are more scared or are able of being scared by the populists, and they have, in many ways, unfortunately, naive hope that this candidate can bring peace. I mean, everybody would love peace, but what Babiš is implying is that basically Ukraine needs to be pressured to capitalize, to basically give up in many ways, so that the war could be shortened, which obviously is not solution for anything. There will be major migration waves if this happens. From Ukraine to Central Europe, and there would be only things would get worse if Ukraine gives up, which is something what the populist is not telling the population now.
Well, Mr. Janda, thank you so much for taking the time to be my guest.
Thank you, my pleasure.
Pratili ste Pangeu. Ja sam Jana Vlahović. Hvala na pažnji i ostanite uz Gradsku.